Hello, my beautiful motorheads. Welcome to Féroce, where we inspire you to live fiercely. I'm your host, Anik Magat, and today we are going to discuss the different types of motorcycling. And I mean by that, what bike do you ride? Why do you ride it? And what does it mean to ride the bike that you ride? I want to start off by saying thank you to all the people who commented on my previous episode, which was episode 06, where I talked about how do I find people to ride with. Ends up everybody who rides is looking for people to ride with, okay? So we all have that in common, which I think is hilarious and great. So I'm glad that that topic resonated. And people were very kind to leave these long comments in which I read through everything, and I deeply appreciate every little bit, ounce, and feedback that you guys give me. And if you don't want to comment, you're too shy to do that publicly, I got you. You can send email at info@liveféroce.com, which will be in the show notes. I have here a couple of comments that some viewers posted. It's going to set up the conversation about bikes and which bikes we ride. So the first one, this guy wrote, "Hi, Anik. This was a well put together story." Why, thank you. I've been struggling with this topic myself. I ride an ADV and want to get into moto camping. Everyone I know rides either Harleys or crotch rockets. My town is absolutely packed with them. Ugh. They're a very clingy bunch and definitely don't have the wave at anyone who isn't riding the same bike we are attitude. Whatever. I couldn't care less. I can't and don't want to ride the same way they do. I do wish that there were more like-minded riders with similar bikes and riding styles in my area. I'm in the middle of the ride less and less every year situation now, which sucks because there are some epic roads in my area. Rides that are best to not do alone for safety reasons and would be super cool to share memories with. Anyway, great video. Keep up the good work. I took a liberty to shorten some of these up. Now, the guy's on an EDV looking for more like-minded people, and he brings up, which is very applicable and culturally significant. Motorcycling, as we all know, it's been was a fringe sport. It's so funny that even in this small group of people, that there's so many different types of riding that exists. So we've got our cruisers, we've got our sport bikes, we got our ADVs, we got our dirt bikes, we've got our ice racing, we've got MotoGP, we've got road racing, we've got motocross, we've got, the list is endless. It's bonkers, all the different type of riding you can do. And I think just as humans, the funny thing is that we end up gravitating to a certain group that we align with. And people can get very righteous and indignant about even perhaps the type of bike that they ride. I'm just gonna use Harley as an example, but maybe I would say that they, for an American brand, really have a strong following, and people truly believe if they ride a Harley, that's what they ride. And always exceptions to the rule. We know. I'm just gonna keep talking grand, broad strokes here. Okay, so if you ride a Japanese bike, a lot of the Japanese riders will bounce between different types of motorcycles. So they're not really brand specific usually. So if you've ridden a Honda, you probably also own a Yamaha and a Suzuki. You know what I'm getting at. Thirdly, you've got like the European. So we got the Euro bikes, and that is BMW, and then the Italians love their bikes, and we've got Ducati, Moto Guzzi, Aprilia, the Germans with BMW, KTM. People can also get very nationalistic about their bikes. Also totally fine. And most people, once you get further and further along into your career of riding or your life of riding, you can either get more staunch into what you actually ride, or you end up owning everything. The funny thing that happens is that one type won't talk to the other and the other type won't talk to the other. And it's really funny. We all have this passion that we love, which is riding. But then when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, people get really specific about what they do or don't like. Motorcycling has changed a lot since I first started riding. There's definitely new trends in the type of riding that's available. When I first started, it was basically just cruisers, sport bikes, and European bikes. Now it is more nuanced, and there's been a huge rise in ADV riding, which is adventure touring, basically, which is bikes that are capable of going on and off-road. I think that that segment has gained popularity because those bikes are easy to ride. People were looking for something that was different than the cruiser or the sport bike. And as we all know, Harley-Davidson dominates the cruiser market. Cruisers in America are a very, very, very big deal. People really identify with the Harley brand, with the cruiser spirit, with just the whole identity of that culture. Sport bikes, which have a long time have been given the moniker of being squid bikes, do not have the best would you call it, like basically the best reputation, which is funny, right? Because like cruiser, you think like Hell's Angels, they don't really have a great reputation. But then you've got the sport bike people and you've got these like squids, right? The squirrely like young guy who is riding way too fast, way too close, taking too many risks, and you just never know what's going to happen around a sport bike. So those are kind of like the two big areas. And then there was everybody in the middle, which were on standard bikes, which, nobody was really paying attention to. So as things evolve, the ADV came up, stands for adventure. And it's a hybrid bike, basically, where it's far more upright in a standard position, but sporty enough that you can really carve through canyons. And then you have the added bonus of being able to take it off-road, which is really the great American dream. As a motorcyclist, you want to be able to go anywhere and everywhere. We want to be able to cross the continental USA. But how often do these different bikes cross paths? Like I said before, that the two dominating bikes used to be cruisers and sport bikes. Now that's changed. I'm going to get back to what this guy wrote, but I wanted to read the second comment that somebody so kindly took the time to type, which I also shortened. Very nice show. I enjoyed watching it. Thank you. I always ride alone, mainly because I don't have many friends that ride. I don't like group ride because it gets too chaotic. The last one that I went on was a charity run. It was my first group ride in quite a while. It was a lot of bikes, mostly Harleys. I have a Can-Am Riker, so I felt out of place. Even though there was one other female that had one, I still felt out of place. So for any of you who don't know what a Can-Am Riker is, it's a three-wheel motorcycle. It's the reverse trike, where the two wheels are in the front and there's one in the back. So this guy was talking about the three-wheel motorcycles, which is a huge contingent that's also been up and coming in the market. In addition to these three-wheeler bikes, another thing that's coming up in the market are electric motorcycles. And it's just a much more diversified playing field of what you can choose from. So much so that it is overwhelming, absolutely overwhelming. How do you decide the type of riding you're going to do? A lot of that comes down to who you're first exposed to when you get into motorcycling. When I first started riding, I was 20. The thing that I was really surprised about is that I didn't know really that other bikes existed besides Harleys. And in my mind, even as a little kid, I thought, when I grow up, I'm gonna get a Harley. But here's the funny thing is that my dad had a Suzuki growing up. And he bought it during the gas crunch and he rode it instead of a car. That was my first exposure to a motorcycle. But somehow I just, even despite that, just thought, yeah, man, it's a Harley. It's gonna be a Harley. Don't know why, don't know where I picked that up. It must have just been absorbed through culture. Now fast forward, and I'm now in college and I took an internship at an electromechanical engineering firm. And I show up there and I start working and I realize that all these guys there own motorcycles. Now the only thing that was surprising about guys owning motorcycles is that it was in New York City. That blew my mind open because I always thought that if I was going to own a motorcycle, I had to have a house in the suburbs with a yard. And I knew, being in college in the city, that that was a long-term goal. This was not happening anytime soon. I was enjoying living in the city. It was awesome. I loved every single part of it. Never saw myself in the suburbs or in a rural area living. So when I found out that these guys all rode, and I looked around, I was like, oh my God, if these guys can ride, I can ride. Why am I waiting? This is crazy. I could ride now. I could ride now. Once that idea seeded, there was no going back. I made it my prerogative that when I graduated, I would get my license and I would get a bike. I was influenced by these guys, right? Because they were my friends. What was surprising was they didn't ride Harleys. What these guys were mainly riding were BMW, Ducati, and Japanese bikes. I felt fortunate in that my first experience of wanting to ride, I was exposed to all these different makes, which is not typical. And I think that, again, getting back to what are you influenced by is going to be your 5 closest friends, or the people you hang out with, or where you grew up, or the environment that you're in. And it's hard to see beyond that environment because it's what you got, right? So how do you make a decision beyond that to do something different? If you grew up in a household where everybody rode Harleys, or you had uncles that rode Harleys, or you were exposed to that, or the cool kid on the block had this super cool Suzuki GSXR 1000 growing up, and you just idolized that guy, you'd be like, oh yeah, when I grow up, that's the bike I'm gonna get. Or your mom commuted on a Ural, and you're like, "Ah, man, I always love that. It was such a great bike." And then you grew up and thought like, all right, like I'm gonna get her bike. Okay. Whatever the situation was, that's how we're most easily influenced in the beginning. What ends up happening? You start riding. And once you start riding, you start to figure out what you do and don't like about certain motorcycles. It's a typical way of the way things happen, right? The more you get into an interest, the more you start to do research, the more you start to ask questions, the more you start to open your mind to what the possibilities are. If you start on one particular bike, you may end up later on riding a different bike because of a conversation that you had. And this all goes back to like, right, leaving the house and having conversations. Leaving the house and you're at the gas station and you see somebody on something you aren't familiar with, and you walk up and just say, hey, it's kind of wondering like, what bike is that? And then again, it strikes a chord or something about that bike draws you to it. Color, sound, presence, the person riding it, the exuberance, the joy, everything that you feel. Like, what is that? Like, what makes that happen? So we end up into these different genres of bikes. Now, the great thing about this is bikes are relatively cheap in the scheme of things, and they're not that big. So that means you can have more than one bike. My favorite question that I ask people on Féroce is, how many motorcycles do you own? This ends up being the best question ever because it really tells you a lot about a person, especially if you get to look into somebody's garage. It's the best. I love when I go to purchase a bike or go with somebody to purchase a bike, and the person selling it typically has to let you into their garage, or they just pull out just the bike so you can't kind of see what's in the garage, but we all want to look in the garage, right? Like, here I am in a garage. You want to know about the garage, and you want to know what else this person has besides the motorcycle behind me. It's fascinating. It's always so interesting to see if you can identify the rider with the bike, because they don't always match up. And the great thing about, again, these motorcycles being relatively inexpensive and small is that you can have more than one. And the second great thing about it is that they're easy to buy and sell. It's actually not that hard. If anybody's making an excuse about buying or selling, they're just being lazy. And come on, we're all like that. Or you don't really want to get rid of it. And, people will say like, well, I don't want to deal with a person on Facebook Marketplace and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you're just being lazy. It's really not that hard. Motorcyclists buying or selling a bike, it's like the easiest process ever. You just got to weed out the yahoos, which is always the case, right? We're always weeding out the yahoos. Or the people that send you the stupid email like, well, would you trade it for a Mitsubishi Eclipse? Why is that the car that everybody always wants to trade a motorcycle for? Who even drives a Mitsubishi Eclipse anymore? So I digress. Getting back to these two comments, it is not uncommon for people to find themselves in a situation where they're the odd man on a bike. And I want to question, does it matter? I have to share this story. And this is like one of my favorite. Oh my God, I just love this story. Okay. We have all been in the situation where we have shown up somewhere and the bike that we're on doesn't quite suit the situation. How do you deal with that? Years ago, I got invited to go with a friend to Marcus Dairy in Danbury, Connecticut. It was this place that was really well known for having these bike meetups, basically. Unfortunately, Marcus Dairy closed in 2011 for a shopping center, which is now a Whole Foods, gentrification. This dairy bar used to host these like epic Sunday meetups. Primarily, the riders who showed up were Harleys. There were a lot of sport bikes, but again, the majority of the people there were Harleys. So a friend invites me to go down to Marcus Dairy. We go down there as a group. And in the middle of this, I mean, it was impressive how many people showed up. There had to be at least 1,000 people. I mean, it was really, really wild, really wild. And it was a gorgeous day and all that great. It was fall, it was a gorgeous day, all beautiful. So as you can imagine, with 1,000 people there with their bikes, it's loud, it's noisy, it's chaotic. It's hard to, you get separated from your people. You're like, I don't even know where they are. All of a sudden, I hear, Monique, hey, over here, Monique. And I look over, and in this sea of burly biker dudes, all these Harley guys, we're talking tons of clubs there. So we got leathers, we got mustaches. Connecticut doesn't have a helmet law, so everybody had like their do-rag with the flames. We got like, the sunglasses that are pulled back. These guys are like, they're feeling it, right? They are like feeling it. They're embodying the Harley spirit. And in the middle of that is my friend Larry on a Vespa. Now, let me give you some context with this. Larry is a gentleman, and this guy showed up. He's got a beautiful Italian leather motorcycle jacket. His Italian-American hair is coiffed perfectly, and he's on this gorgeous vintage Vespa. The friend that I was with looks at me, looks at him, looks at me, and goes, "You are the only person that would know somebody like that at this rally." And I was like, damn right. And I love it. It was awesome. The guys all around him that were like the burly biker dudes were totally side glancing Larry. They were just like, get a load of this guy. Larry could not have given a... I have to say that this was the epitome of confidence. He owned it. Larry knew that he was going to be the odd man out. He was not stupid when he came up to this event. And he was on, I'm telling you, a gorgeous motorcycle. And knowing Larry, let me also say, every motorcycle he owns is beautiful. He puts a lot of time, money, and effort into making it the best of the best of the best that it can be. Now, while these gruff biker dudes were all side glancing this guy like, whatever, and dismissing him, a great secret about Larry that none of them would have ever known is he's actually a racer, and pretty damn good racer, might I add. So what's really funny is that even though all these burly dudes were side-eyeing him, Larry could, on that Vespa, ride circles around them. To this day, I love that whole situation, right? You can't judge a book by its cover. And we as motorcyclists, say that we don't want to be judged and like all this, but here we are all judging each other for what we ride. And it's kind of silly because who gives a what motorcycle you're on? You know what I'm saying? Like if you're riding, there's room at the table. We can all sit together and ride whatever you got. It gets back to, what bike are we choosing to ride and why are we riding it? If this notion between all of us is, oh, you're in that category and you're in that category, and if you're this type of rider, then we don't really want to ride with you, or we're not interested in talking to you. And it happens. Like it happens to me all the time. It is not uncommon, especially when I'm test riding bikes, that I will roll up and it'll be an awkward situation. Now, I have on my side the fact that I've got a nice girl next door look, right? So I'm not intimidating versus if a 6'5" burly dude rolls up and into a different group and they're not going to want to talk to him. One of the things the guy mentioned was that he noted that he felt like the different groups were cliquey. And I'm sure they probably are. Even though we're all adults, we never quite get out of high school, you know what I'm saying? But a lot of it can be perceived attitude, and it's easy to make assumptions, and the assumptions keep us from actually knowing whether or not that's true. If people are appearing as cliquey, you might just get a bad vibe. There's a difference between like cliquey and getting a bad vibe. Getting a bad vibe, don't hang out with people you get a bad vibe with. Always trust your gut. But as far as cliquey, sometimes it's just that people are so socially awkward on a level that we don't even think exists. But the reality is like, to a certain degree, everybody's socially awkward. And we are even more socially awkward at this point, having spent 4 years indoors. You know what I'm saying? So as we're still brushing off the cobwebs of socializing, things are going to appear cliquey. But sometimes all it takes is that one conversation. And as I said in the previous episode, I'm good at making people be friends with me. And even if they don't want to be friends with me, which is totally okay, at least I can try to kind of get them to acknowledge me. So the same thing goes for like if, roll up and you see a cliquey group of guys hanging out on their bikes at like a viewpoint, sometimes all it takes is just a simple hi. And people will put their defenses down. Like you will really see that. And in most cases, because people are so socially awkward, and guys, I'm just going to tell you this, is that you can sometimes just look mean because you're there with what people call on women resting bitch face. Guys kind of have like resting mean face. And doesn't mean anything. It's just the way they look when they don't think anybody's looking, or they're deep in thought or whatever. So just be aware that maybe like us ourselves may not be putting out the best vibe, right? Like we might also be adding to the clickiness or adding to the awkwardness, and that's okay. We practice. And with each interaction, we try different things. So again, I encourage you just to be open to different styles of riding. You might find a new riding buddy who is on a bike that you don't particularly like today, but might have a garage full of bikes that you actually love and would absolutely love riding with him or her. You know what I'm saying? So what happens if you start in a specific style and then you find that you want to change? Some of this comes naturally through age, where when you were younger, you might have been able to ride a certain bike with more ease. Sport bikes, if they're really set up to be aggressive, handlebars might be dropped down, the seat, the hip to foot ratio might be up and really tight. So for long rides, that might get exhausting, and in which case you might want to switch to a different motorcycle if you have back pain or you've been in an accident of some type, not motorcycle related necessarily, but any motorcycle life, or you have a knee injury and you just find that you maybe need a bike that has much more room and opening. Now, with cruisers, one of the downsides to cruisers is that you are in that C shape, the C shape, which I have to say is like perhaps the most aesthetically unattractive shape ever. There is no way to be in the C shape and keep your stomach in. Like you're in the C shape, you are just letting it all hang out, people. We're letting it all hang out. The thing about the C shape is that it puts an enormous amount of strain on your lower back. And if you're on any sort of older cruiser that has tough suspension, it can be really hard on your lower back. And if your arms are extended for a long amount of time, you can really start to feel the fatigue. And when we ride like this, it puts an enormous amount of strain on our shoulders, because you usually end up rolling those shoulders up towards your ears, and no good. So over time, you might want to change your type of riding because it hurts too much. Some people will just give up riding because they will not just try to find something else. They'll just suffer through the pain or give up because they don't want to move to a different make or model. I believe the rise of ADV has happened because it's that happy medium. I think the reality of ADV riding is that I would say probably 50% of the people don't actually ever take it off-road. But it's popular because the ADV bikes offer comfort. You're in an upright seated position. You typically have a windscreen, which allows you to be buffered from the wind. You can extend your riding period. You're not out in the open, getting whipped around. The suspension is usually softer than on a sport bike or certain cruisers. I believe the rise has happened because it appeals to more people and it appeals to a wider type of riding. Now, I'm all for getting as many motorcycles as you want. And the reason why I always joke about it in my purchasing of bikes is like, you need a shoe for every situation, right? I mean, I could just stay with sneakers and tell you why I justify having 4 or 5 different types of sneakers. Because you need your running sneakers, you need your trail sneakers where the tread is different so you don't pick up rocks. You need your lifting sneakers. You need your inside the gym sneakers because you got to keep those clean and you don't want to use your clean sneakers outside. You know what I'm saying? Like there's all these reasons why you have different pairs of shoes, sneakers in particular. It's the same with bikes. And again, going back to, they're not that expensive. Having different types of motorcycles allows you to explore different types of riding. And even more so, it also allows you to explore different parts of yourself. I love having different types of motorcycles. And if I had more room, I would have a lot more motorcycles. Thank goodness I don't have that much room. I don't own that many motorcycles, but I have the privilege of being able to test ride all these different makes and models, which is a huge benefit, which allows me to not personally own so many motorcycles because I can go out, try them, leave them, try something else, leave it, try something else, leave it. When I look at motorcycles as an expression of myself, it's nice to be able to explore all these different sides that I embody. We're all complicated. We're not just all one type of person. We are different in different scenarios. The great thing about all these different motorcycles that are available to us is that we can try these different sides of us. I love a sport bike. I consider myself athletic and I like to play sports. I like to take good care of myself. And I feel like sport bikes embody that because they also embody the game. I race motorcycles, and when you're on the track, it is full on a sport, which is why they're called sport bikes. You're focused, you have to make quick decisions, you have to react to your environment. It all brings up that like part of me is an adrenaline rush. It's fun. It challenges me, all these different things. So I get great joy from riding a sport bike. I also love vintage motorcycles, and I love them because got soul. Old bikes have soul, and a lot of new bikes don't have soul, which doesn't mean that they're not great. It's just different. And an old bike needs care and attention. It needs being taken care of. And I find that for me, it brings out this other side of my personality that loves and appreciates good design, loves and appreciates old things that were made differently than things are made now. I love and appreciate that these old motorbikes still run. If you take good care of them, they will continue to run. If you can find new parts for them, they will continue to run. That whole process of maintaining and taking care, while it can be burdensome, is also really empowering. And it feels great to continue to make something run that's 40, 50, 60 years old and to take it out. Sometimes you might even feel like, oh my gosh, I think I am taking my life in my hands when the brakes barely work and you're not sure if you're going to break down on the side of the road on any given ride. ADV bikes for me are super fun because I love the woods. I envision at some point that I will be an awesome dirt rider. I'm nowhere close at this point. I'm a mediocre dirt rider. I have a lot more experience on the road, but I aspire to be a good dirt rider. And the ADV bikes give me enough of a sense where I feel full of adventure. Like it's really fun to go on a dirt. It challenges you in a completely different way. It's physically hard because you really have to pay attention and you're usually standing up on the pegs and you're much more physically moving around the bike than you would in other scenarios. So it's a good workout. Again, there's just like this sense of adventure. And more so, even if I take my ADV bike and I don't go in the woods, there's something about knowing that I could go out in the woods. I could see that trail, or I can see a set of power lines and I can say, yeah, man, I could do that. But I'm busy today and I gotta go get groceries. So ADV riding, like super fun and adventurous. And, we all want to be adventurers, right? I don't think there's a single one of us that doesn't dream of taking some like grand adventure, some sort, whatever it is. And the ADV bikes definitely check the box off there. There's the cruisers. Cruisers are the ultimate American machine, right? Freedom, open road, wind in my hair. I don't know why I'm talking like this. It just seems appropriate for the situation. Cruisers are fun. You're forced to go slower. Not always. Like that's not necessarily true. These cruisers a lot of them are like over 1,000 cc's. So like they can scoot, if you know what I'm saying. But there's something about a cruiser that just kind of makes you not want to, unless you're like really in a rhythm. But it's not really about trying to take the corner as fast as you can. That's what sports bikes are for. There's something just about being on a cruiser and embodying that American spirit. Like it's very alluring. That's why there's so many movies about it. There's so many books written about it. There's the badass character that's always on a cruiser of some type. And lastly, the other category that I'm going to throw into here are mini bikes. And they are having a real time and place right now, which I think is awesome. One example would be like the Honda Grom or scooters or any mini bike. If you have ridden sizable bikes for most of your riding career, get on a small bike. I'm going to tell you, it's going to be the most fun you will have in 30 minutes. I always joke about that, like I'm on a little bike and I test ride all these different smaller bikes. There's one thing that these little bikes have is that you cannot take them seriously and you cannot take yourself seriously when you're riding one of these bikes. And it is completely liberating. I'm telling you, like liberating on a level that you just have to experience, take my word for it and experience. I was at a bike night. These guys were chit-chatting. There's like two brothers, like a bunch of friends, and they were like giggling like schoolgirls at the table. And what they were giggling about was that they were recounting that they decided to take out all these small bikes. So they were like on a monkey, anything that was like 125 cc's or 100 cc's, they took out and they went on this 10-mile ride, maybe even a little bit more than that. Doesn't matter. The point was they were giggling because they couldn't stop laughing. They were like, oh my God, it was so much fun. It was so much fun. Oh yeah, when he was coming in and he was trying to pass me, he couldn't pass me. The bike was just too small. I was like, no, I was going down the hill and I was trying to tuck in and go as fast as I can. He was like, no, it was like the brakes. I was trying to get the brakes. No, you gotta put your feet down and get the brakes. Like these guys were literally having fun and joy. And what was so great about it was these mini bikes, just in general, they don't cost money in comparison to other things. Like they're very low cost. And if you buy them used, like they're super low cost. So you want like a lot of bang for your buck, buy a little mini bike and ride it down to your mailbox to like go pick up your mail. And I'm going to tell you, it's probably going to be the highlight of your day. So all that said, what is your style of riding and why do you choose it? Should we care what other people think about the bike that we're on? And how do we start to be more accepting of people on different bikes? And I get it. Sometimes when you go on a ride, you don't really want to, if you're in a small group, you don't really want to go on a ride with people on different bikes if it's too cumbersome to the riding that's happening. So for instance, if somebody's on a cruiser and they're a slow rider, and then somebody shows up on a sport bike, leader bike, which is like 1,000 cc's, and then you've got somebody who else showed up on a mini bike and they're on a 125, and you've got some dude on an ADV that never wants to stop because he can't reach the ground. That can potentially be very annoying, but you can also kind of agree, can we all kind of be on bikes today that work? I mentioned in that finding people to ride with is that the group that I particularly ride with, we know that particular ride, we're all going to be on ADV bikes. So it works. Now, with other people, I will typically ask them, hey, today, what bike are you going to ride? They'll tell me, and then I'll try to match the bike that I'm riding. If I don't have a choice about what bike I'm riding, I'll just ask the person that shows up, do you have something that is comparable, or would you be comfortable riding with me on this bike? Sometimes I also just don't care. and I will, I'll show up on the wrong bike just to like temper the ride. If I know that person is a little bit willy-nilly about their riding, or I don't know them and I suspect that they might be, I will intentionally show up on a smaller bike so that they will just think that I won't be able to keep up and they'll temper their riding, when in fact I probably could outride them on their bike with the baby bike. The sentiment and a lot of the comments that I got from that last podcast was everybody feels the same about trying to look for people to ride with. And if we could perhaps be a little bit more open-minded about riding with somebody that we wouldn't typically ride with, we might be delighted. And, maybe instead of judging them or feeling like they're judging us, we can maybe like pump the brakes on that and just kind of throw ourselves out there or see if it's a possibility, or invite that person that you always see riding by themselves and say, hey, I know we're not on the same bike, but would you want to go for a ride together? I mentioned that I ride with my cousin who is 2 up on a motorcycle with her husband. They're on a Harley. And I typically, if I'm not on a borrowed bike that I'm test riding, then I will just ride my baby dual sport. The really funny thing about this is like, they could care less. They're just, they make no judgment about me being on that bike. Okay, I take that back. They find it funny that I ride that little bike, and they're really highly amused by it. Like, we joke back and forth, and they're always like, when are you going to get a Harley? When are you going to get a Harley? And I'm like, I don't know. And then somehow, whenever they want to take a rest break, it'll inevitably be at a Harley dealership. And what's really funny about Harley dealership is it ends up that they put the bathrooms all the way in the back through the showroom. So you have to walk through the showroom to go to the bathroom. And my cousins will tease me and they'll be like, hey, what about that bike? Oh, what do you think about that color? Oh, I can see you on that. Maybe you should get that. It's not that expensive. And then they'll do things like this where my cousin made me this like really cool custom Yeti. And that's because she would always I didn't bring water with me, and she would bring one for me. She'd bring a Yeti for me. And it's got all these sayings on here. And then she put in a very subtle writing. Can you read that? It says, I should be on a Harley. Yeah, that's the type of family I got. So we were out riding. We were like somewhere in Vermont at some point, kind of deep in Vermont. And we're stopped. And I hear in the distance, we hear the thunder of bikes coming. Like, I'm going to wonder who these people are coming through. And it was like 10 guys on ADV bikes. They rumble by. And I turn to my cousins and I go, look, there go my people. And ever since then, it's been a joke where they'll text me if they see a lone rider out in the wild on a BMW or some type of, like a Triumph Tiger or anything like that. And they'll be like, oh, look, we spotted one of your people. It's really cute. I can't really do that with the Harleys because they're everywhere. I'd be sending them a lot of texts. Okay, so getting back to what is your style of riding? I'm of the mind, ride what you want and own it. Let's invite other types of riding to our table because who knows, you might learn a thing and you might be inspired to try a different form of riding. I don't think that one style is necessarily better than the other. It all depends who you are and like what works for you. If we did this, it would probably also help the industry because the manufacturers are also trying to figure out what do people want to ride. It's a tough question. There's a lot of options now out there. There are electric bikes, there are scooters, there are three-wheeled motorcycles, there are all types. And let me tell you, the world is your oyster. Just pick one or two or five. And it kind of probably depends on like how big your garage is. So that's the case, why not pick them all? As I wrap up here, just want to remind you, please like and subscribe or follow on whatever platform that you are either watching or listening to this right now. It helps. I also love the comments. This episode is based on being inspired by what you guys wrote, and I really appreciate every comment. I look at all of them, and it gives me ideas for what's important to you and what you might find interesting. And if there are topics that you would like me to talk about, I'd be more than happy to do that. You can do that in the comments, or again, you can email me directly at info@liveféroce.com. So as always, my friends, ride smart. Ciao.